Hey gang, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company. It's a podcast about music and Web3 and trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm McKeegan Voice. Today I spoke with Garrett Hughes. Hughes is a music and technology lover from Richmond, Virginia. His loves have collided a few times, most notably when he co-founded the music NFT platform Mint Songs, which thrived until it didn't. Ultimately sunsetting until it rose from the ashes earlier this year when the tech was purchased by Napster. Today, Hughes is an engineer at Dune Analytics, but he's still an advisor at Napster and stays close to music. We chatted about his journey, covering everything from love to on-chain music trends to the great outdoors. Hope y'all enjoyed the conversation. Here we go. Hey Garrett, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So as with all of these, I'd like to start at the beginning and just learn a little bit more about your origins, your story, where you grew up, and when your relationship with music first started.
I was born and raised in Virginia, grew up a little bit in the countryside, and have a lot of fond memories in nature. And that kind of ties into a lot of my just like paradigms of life, I think. I started in music around, I don't know, probably it was early middle school. And in the US, at least, actually, like in elementary school in the US, they make you play. They're not flutes. I can't even remember what they're called.
The recorder.
Yes, the recorder. I don't know if that's an international thing or not.
Yeah, I mean they played it. That's what they do in Minnesota as well. I played a recorder in kindergarten. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And so did the recorder thing, and then from there picked up guitar, got lessons. I did that for probably 4 years, I think, through middle school, and then started high school. I don't know, it fell off my radar a little bit. And I started to really get into EDM and mashups. That was like my next thing. And that
Cool.
lasted like almost throughout college. And then I took a break as I really focused on like technology and startups. And when I started Mint Songs, I was going to the studio with these artists, and it was really inspiring. And I was like I spent years practicing this. Like I should probably pick it back up. And even down there's a little MIDI keyboard and a beat pad that I started to teach myself on. I'm not very good at it, but yeah, that's been the progression.
Cool. At some point, I want to come back to nature as part of your paradigm of life. But before I dive into that, I'm curious who, as you started to build Mint Songs, actually, let's go one step before that even. I would love to hear just how Mint Songs came to be conceived. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, I think a good starting point for this is probably college. In college, I was helping run a sticker business. We were doing about 60 grand in sales. Like the sticker realm is a lot of stickers. And
Sounds like it.
And so that was kind of like the entrepreneurial itch. And then from there, I started my own photography company where I got to work with people like Ferrari, Lamborghini, and other big brands, including the outdoor industry. And I got like almost addicted to this desire to build something myself. And so that led me to a group at my college, James Madison University, called Society of Entrepreneurs. And Dwight, my co-founder at Mint Songs, was also a part of that. And so that's where me and Dwight met. I think it was sophomore year of college. So this would have been, I don't know, like 2012, I think. Cool. Maybe I'm dating myself, hopefully not. And that number sounds a lot further away now.
It's just gonna keep getting further and further away, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately. and me and Dwight stayed in touch through the years. I joined an early SaaS startup. I was an early engineer there and scaled with them to a very large size, and they're now a unicorn. And I'd seen the playbook. It was work really hard, get a little lucky. In tandem, at the same time, so that company was called House Call Pro, working on that full time. I also did my master's in computer science. And you'll probably see this trend, which I'm trying to get much healthier about, which is I just to keep the pedal down 150 miles an hour.
Got it. Okay.
And then right when I finished my master's, I started working with another friend of mine, Brad, who I just met through San Diego. This is when we were living in San Diego. He was an entrepreneur. We were working on something called yoga music, which was
Cool.
basically like there was a potential need for leaders of classes, not just yoga, but flow, all these different concepts, even spin, that you want to keep BPM around a certain level. And as the workout progresses, you want to manage that. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of leaders were doing this themselves, which is a tedious, annoying task. And so we worked together to build this platform that would do that for you automatically. And we were a Techstars music finalists. We didn't end up getting in. And so me and him, he had another endeavor that he was working on that turned out to be a good success. And we decided to park it. Maybe we'll revisit it in years to come. And at that same time, Dwight reached out to me. And before this, too, me and Dwight had worked on a music startup called Channel, which was like basically think like Instagram stories meets YouTube shorts. And we would surface new content from YouTube, put it into digestible pieces for people to come. And then you would connect your account. We would see who you like. We would just create a feed for you, basically. Pandemic hit and there were no more live shows, so we
Mm-hmm.
sunset Channel. And then later that year, I think it was fall 2020, Dwight was playing around with Top Shots, which was
Mm-hmm.
at Dapper Labs sports NFTs. And he reached out to me and was like, music NFTs. And at this time, me and him had been in crypto together since 2017. And my first reaction was like, what the hell are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a lot of people's reaction
Yeah.
to NFTs. And so I did a lot of research and thought about things pragmatically. And I started to see a lot of the use cases. And after a couple months, I was like, you know what? Get an angel check. I'll quit my job. And keep in mind, I'm still at this high growth SaaS. It's really, it's borderline my dream job.
Got it.
And he calls me. I'll never forget this. He called me like a day later. He's like, I have our first angel check. And I was like, all right.
Wow.
Like,
That was quick.
yeah. And so I put in my 2 weeks, and which really was like 4 weeks because I had to help them transition a lot of stuff. And that's when we dove in. And so that's the origin of Mint Songs. And then from there, the goal was just to ship and iterate and try to create the best sustainable business that we
Mm-hmm.
could.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were re-inspired by music and the creation of music when you were working on Mint songs and seeing some of these artists, like being in the studio with them. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about who some of those artists were and like what exactly was inspiring you.
Yeah, all over. We actually, in the personal realm of life, we moved back to Richmond to be close to family, Richmond,
Mm,
Virginia. And it was funny because we were in the studio in Record Plant out in LA, which is a really famous recording studio. And
mm-hmm.
there's this guy that was ripping on I think it was a bass guitar. And who is this dude? And turns out he was from Richmond.
Oh,
And it was just these really cool things. I think we did a lot of partnerships. So we worked with Sydney Swift, who runs an NFT project called Chill Pill, if you've heard of
mm,
it. And then we also did a handful of sessions with Illmind, who's a world renowned producer. And he also ironically runs an NFT collection called Squad of Nights. It's done
mm,
fairly well as well. And seeing those guys in the studio, and there would be all sorts of people that come through. I met a lot of really talented artists, people that I'm still friends with today. And I don't know, it was a blast. It was just so
cool.
inspiring.
Cool. And did that get you starting to play guitar again?
Yep, exactly.
Nice.
That was that. Yeah, honestly, it was that session in Record Plant where they were ripping on the guitar, and actually, the guy that was ripping on the guitar was an employee of Sydney Swift,
Mm.
over at Chill Pill, and he just picked it up and he was like, "Let me just try," and I was like, "Damn, this is you can sit on a beat and just everybody's just chilling, you're just like ripping, and I don't know. It's like a really inspiring feeling. And like the energy in that room was just electric, wouldn't even be like a proper adjective. Like
Mm.
it was like
Cool.
something surreal. And yeah,
Mm.
that's what ultimately inspired me. And then I also picked up the MIDI and the
Mm.
beat pad as well, just to because I saw people playing on these things and it was just I don't know. It was magic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing more inspiring than seeing someone else just pick up a guitar casually and be like, oh, yeah, let me try this thing and just casually rip off this sweet guitar solo. Or, yeah, just that moment of magic that where you can, it's transcendent when you're around that, like someone creating that music with their bodies somehow.
100%. And I
But
don't have people who pay to hear me not sing. And so like singing is not on my forte of talents. And so you'd see these people coming in with different talents, whether it's piano or producing or vocals. And those felt like maybe too far of a stretch where I'm probably not going to get to that point, but I can at least pick this
yeah,
back up and
totally.
play a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming back to Mint songs, and can you talk a little bit about what it felt like to ride that wave as NFTs were like the thing and then became not the thing? And ultimately like the decision to sunset Mint songs and just talk through that process a bit and that journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very high moment in my life and a very low moment in my life all wrapped in one. And like writing it into the sunset was really fun. I think like NFTs were on a tear. We always looked at things from a very pragmatic standpoint where NFTs were the underlying infrastructure and we never put like this huge emphasis on NFTs or we tried to obfuscate it as much as possible. And it was really enjoyable. It was challenging. We came up with a lot of things that worked well. What obviously didn't work well, and what ultimately led to our sunset was we actually couldn't come up with a sustainable model. Which ironically now at the time of this recording, which is August of 2023, you're starting to see this common theme play out.
Hmm.
And it's tough. I think to build a sustainable model in crypto is a really challenging process, and very few have done that. I My assumption is we're going to see more people fail, which I hate to say, but I think it's inevitable. And it came around that time where we were like, you were looking at your burn, going, that number goes down and down, and I think we got to 12 months, and that was like a really eye-opening point. And we weren't having success fundraising. Now we were in the bear market. We laid off a good chunk of the team to help hopefully extend the runway. And we started to do a lot of work on our modeling for how we become default alive, which is the concept of basically how do you survive on no more VC dollars? And we couldn't come up with a model that worked. We tried, we worked on this for weeks. We explored the idea of a pivot, but we didn't have conviction. We just had to make a really hard decision to pull the ripcord and return the remaining capital to investors. And we felt that was the most prudent thing to do. And it was hard. It was really hard. You hear advice like, oh, you always got to like power through it. Like no matter what, just keep trudging through. And then you're like, well, if I take a step back, like we've had success, but there's no real path to us being sustainable. And it was a really hard decision. Many tears, many late nights. I probably aged myself by at least a decade.
Yeah, no, I know the hardship of trying to grind through a project because you do have a lot of conviction and a lot of your heart has gone into it and just wanting it to be alive at all costs, default alive. It's a good place to be ultimately. That, of course, was not the end of the story for Mint Songs, and I'd love to hear how the tale continues. Enter Napster.
Yeah, yeah. We built some things that were pretty good tech. We'd always hedged ourselves like we had a world class engineering team, and we built a lot of things that were really good. And so Napster ended up acquiring a lot of our IP, and can't speak too much into what they're doing, but they're working on some really cool things behind the scenes, and that should come to fruition in the coming months. And yeah, I'm just excited to see where that goes. John, the CEO, he's a very smart individual. He's been in the music industry for a while, and I felt like he was a real partner throughout the process, where everything felt like a little bit of push and pull, and it was we landed at an amicable solution, and yeah, it just worked out in that favor. And also it's ironic because it's a little full circle in like the whole macro scheme of music, because Napster's known for disrupting. They've survived a very long time. And now a focus of their business model is crypto, which is obviously disruptive technology. And it felt a little full circle.
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't know as much about like the Naps like the constitution of Napster as an organization, like the personnel now. I'm just like looking at LimeWire, which basically resurrected the brand, but like none of the IP or anything, like literally just the IP to the brand was resurrected and then used to raise money and create an NFT platform. But I'm curious if Napster has maintained any of its personnel, any of the ethos, the direction, the vision that existed way back in the late 90s and when everybody that knows of Napster remembers it for.
Yeah, no, I think that I've sat in some of the all hands, and I think that passion's still there. I don't think it went away. Obviously, the Napster nowadays is totally different of a
Right,
company from the Napster back in
right.
the like the OG days, which is probably some would argue maybe for the better,
Yeah.
given that was maybe a little too disruptive. And I think that I think that like little burn in their historical journey helps drive them into what's next, which is like not looking at the world as it is, but looking at the world as it could be. And I think that's powerful. And genuinely, it seems that everybody at Napster is extremely passionate about doing good to the music industry.
Cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you said you can't speak much to the specifics of what Napster is doing in the Web3 space, but I wonder if you can speak a little bit more abstractly about this kind of convergence of Web 2 and Web 3 within music and streaming, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it still really hasn't happened in a scalable way that it could potentially, with something like Napster. I'm curious just to hear, like, more generally, if you can talk about it, like where you see what you're excited about in like how platforms like, say, Spotify could lean in to whether it's music NFTs or other elements of the on-chain ecosystem to create more value for ideally artists and like their communities, but in effective ways that also increases the value of their product in by whatever metrics.
Obviously, this was a core ethos of Mint Songs. And so this doesn't necessarily apply to Napster. And I think that this is like mostly my views at a larger level, but like the way for NFTs to get more adopted is to obfuscate the technology as much as possible. And so, obviously, by coupling that to DSPs or streaming, those users, the likelihood that they use crypto is small. And so, creating these accessible paths for consumers, regardless of the underlying technology, I think is really powerful. The way that we approached this at Mint Songs was always we need to onboard fans through a frictionless experience. I think a lot of DSPs are looking at this in the same viewpoint. And I think it's obvious that we have to look, or at least it's obvious to me. Maybe this is actually a debatable point. I don't know. But I think it's obvious that we have to get out of the crypto Twitter bubble or the niche crypto bubble into a broader fan enablement of like, why are we doing this? How does it benefit an artist? And really being artists first and how we view these things. And then I think the secondary thing is being fan secondary, if you will, or some could argue fan first, where it's not just do we have to provide the rails for artists, but we also have to provide realistic paths and expectations for fans where it's what is this thing? And we struggled with that at Mint Songs as we went to a broader fan base where it's the age-old question. I can listen to this on Spotify. Why do I need to pay 30, 300, or $3,000 for this? And so providing these interesting mechanisms that can be pulled, I think it's powerful.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what, yeah, just today I was writing a piece about this kind of idea about how lost, we've forgotten that things used to cost money.
Totally.
And we're just like, not everything, of course, but things like music, anything that's been platformized essentially. And we're so used to just paying a subscription fee every month to get access to every single thing that exists. it feels like a really important transition, or I guess reversion, but also one that's going to have a lot of friction to introduce like paying money for music again. And I feel like that's one of the, to your point in talking about what's the utility, like why should I pay for this when I can stream it for free ostensibly? And I think you're alluding to a lot of the different mechanisms that you can play with Web3 and with the blockchain, and as this direct to fan disintermediating technology where you get direct transparency to like who is on the other side of your music, and then you can provide utility to those people very directly without any middlemen. And I think that's really exciting. I also have been having a tough time thinking about how you can reconcile this sort of potential for intimate community that can
Mm,
happen through the direct purchase of something like an NFT and cultivating that with something like scale, like something like a streaming platform that is scalable. It's meant to be scalable. It's got 120,000 songs being uploaded to it every single day. What's the middle ground? How do we reconcile these two ideas of like community versus kind of infinity?
yeah, it's hard. I think you're really touching on a core tenet, which is like discoverability. I think we experienced this at Mint Songs. I think when it was all said and done, about 100,000 NFTs were minted through our contract. And we started to see a level where it was getting more complicated on who shows up on the homepage. How do you sort? Do you have an open algorithm? Is it proprietary? Do you have something
Right.
that's very simple where it's just whoever uploads it, it's just a time descending? And these things got complicated. It got complicated
I
quickly.
imagine.
I would receive emails like, "Hey, we'll pay you $100 to be on the front page." That doesn't feel right,
Mhm,
despite our
mhm.
monetary issues. Like,
Yeah.
because then it's just like effectively bribing or advertising, which didn't
Yeah.
feel like the direction we wanted to go in. And then people are mad that they're not on the front page or featured. Or I think it's really hard. And I think you're even partially discovering this with sound as they've opened up to a broader platform where it's now finding stuff's hard. It used to be really simple. I think the discoverability aspect is really difficult. And I think for what it's
Mhm,
worth, I think this is a hard concept with everything, like including
mhm.
DSPs today, where
Totally.
there's millions of songs and it shouldn't be at a place where if you get featured on a playlist, you all of a sudden make it as an artist.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Yeah.
That feels obviously broken to me. But I also like taking a step back, I recognize that this is a really complicated problem, especially having dealt with it on even like a much, much smaller scale. Like these are hard problems to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess if they weren't, they may be solved at this point.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you. Like when it's to the point where like one little thing that one person can decide in a platform in which that is super saturated with content can make a decision to put you onto a playlist, and that can literally change your life and make your career or not, is a little wild. But there's some power dynamics that exist there that we need to revisit. It just the amount of power that editorial playlists and Spotify have is maybe a little outsized. We need to democratize that. To your point, it's like very complicated. Like when you have this much music, how do you begin to do it? And in my mind, is like this, like you have to reintroduce more of a human element to it, not in the sense of an editorial playlist, but contextualize it, make it think more locally again, back to your local blog. I've been talking a lot about like the blog days, the glory
Those are
days
some
of
of
the
my favorite
blog.
days.
They're so good.
This song is sick and a lot of really epic. I don't know. I remember going on a lot of those early vlogs and you would, or at least for me, I would monitor it daily, sometimes even hourly.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because there's like a snippet of context, and you come to know who the writers are, whose taste that you appreciate over time through context. And that I think is like through the formification of music has been abstracted away.
Talking back on some of the models that we explored as we were like trying to figure out our model, it was like, what if we made community voting or like this concept of like community driven, for all intents and purposes, of blog. And I think there's somebody's tackling this right now outside of the music space. There was this DAO. I don't know if they're still around. Joke DAO. I don't know if you,
Joke Dow.
yeah. And
Not
so,
familiar.
yeah, it's basically, so it's jokerace.xyz is the domain that it's
Okay.
on. And it's contest for communities to make, execute, and reward decisions. And so, this is the open protocol that we played around with. And it was interesting. The original concept was around jokes, obviously from JokeDAO. And so it was like submit a joke as a community, we'll vote on it. Whoever wins, you get a reward. And
Mm.
so that's how we thought about curation, where it's let's create this curative experience on chain where then you could start seeing some of the key players, like who are the tastemakers, if you will, or who has a lot of the foresight. Now, where this potentially breaks is again, you find out who that person is. Now you can bribe, you can figure out,
Yeah.
you can take them
Yeah.
out to dinner, and all of a
Right.
sudden they vote with maybe confidence or not confidence on extending it, and others may agree or not agree. And so it's always a challenge with who has the most power.
Yeah, indeed. It's a good point. It's the old payola. You can't get rid of it, no matter what you do. But it's an interesting
Yep.
challenge. Like, how do you? I feel like maybe something like a DAO is best equipped to create disincentives for people to do that, to take a bribe. I don't know how. It's an interesting thought experiment. Like, how do you play around with mechanics to disincentivize that? Because everything is so transparent and everything is potentially on chain. Like, how can you facilitate structures that could hold up and not break down as you build out these like curation routes?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. But one argument that I've seen, and I think this was even an announced proposal, is like at the end of the day, this is going to happen. And so we should encourage and create the rails to do this on chain so it's visible.
Huh.
Whether I agree with that or not, maybe it's up for discussion. But if you're operating under the assumption that bribery is going to happen irrespective,
Mm.
then creating it in an open environment where anybody can see at least who's driving narrative maybe isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought. I'd be curious on what you think about that.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is like the harm reduction model for drugs. It's like we know people are going to use drugs, so let's make sure they do it safely and are educated, and we can regulate them, which makes a lot of sense. I know that model has been very effective for those who have implemented it. Obviously, drugs are different than something like a bribe. But I do, that does make sense in terms of the approach, because like maybe, or maybe it's the beginning of more structure to it. As long as you can see it happening and it's on chain, it's transparent, then you understand the motivations, you understand, like you can actually then build, once you have the observable behavior, then you understand what is incentivizing people. Therefore, you could potentially understand how to disincentivize people from participating in that behavior, or at least trying to attenuate it as much as you possibly can. I don't know what that would look like. I've never thought about this specific thing before, but I am intrigued.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. That was the tweet that kind of sparked a lot of this, where it was like you could bid on noun votes, and
Mm,
this is bribery.
uh-huh.
Like whether you want to execute, like whether, yeah. And it's interesting. I think it's really interesting in the context of nouns, because you talk about somebody that has like a war chest treasury. And so at what point does the like how close do you get if you were a nouns holder, and let's say nouns as a whole has, I don't know how much they have. Last I think I looked, it was like $30 million or something. It's a lot. And if I go check out nouns right now, what are they on? 798. So if you gave each of them, so 800, let's just do some fun math. If you gave each of them 100 grand, would you get enough consensus to execute on draining the entire treasury? Or like, at what threshold do you get?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's true.
And
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's
at some
interesting,
point when you get to, yeah, that's an interesting model. I
right?
don't know. What is the payout threshold where everybody just votes to
Yeah. And sorry, yeah, they have 50 million, 53 million. So like you
53
could pay
million?
orders of magnitude higher where you're talking like, what if you paid each of them? You could, in theory, pay each of them. If you did 50 grand for each, yeah, it'd be 40 million. And then the person that executes would still be able to keep 20 million or 15 million. That's not a
Yeah.
bad deal.
True. Everyone makes
I
50
just,
grand. Yeah.
but my assumption is that people would block this at like a ethical layer where it's like we wouldn't want to be associated with this.
Yeah, at a fundamental level. It's also, I feel like the experiment of nouns is 800 people who are interested in continuing the experiment, the experiment, and let's see how we can grow it, what we can build. The motivations change over time, but also something I hadn't thought too much about that is interesting to think when you like pair governance with these tokens that can potentially have a lot of value.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fascinating rabbit hole. And I think there are ties into music where, there could be interesting outcomes. And so obviously we shied away from it because as we did research, we couldn't build conviction,
Mm,
but it's interesting nonetheless.
yeah. Do you remember any of the ideas or models that you were playing around with that perhaps didn't have quite enough conviction to move forward to actually implement and build, but you were excited about?
I definitely think this was one of them for sure. You would stake, maybe there would be a cryptocurrency involved or not, like our own token. There are a bunch of interesting things where this could be fascinating. I think the regulatory space in the US was too much of a risk for us to hedge that on. And so I think this was like one of the ones that we gained a lot of conviction around. Something else we started to explore was how we create a hub for artists where you would, I think, as we built Mint Songs, like it was very clear that we shouldn't gate or discourage people from going to other platforms. I think it was really clear that you should drop on Catalog, you should drop on Sound, you should drop on Mint
Mm-hmm.
Songs, you should do these things. And like the whole name of the game is experimentation. And if we're
Right.
discouraging artists from experimenting, we're doing a disservice to artists, which was like our core focus, how do we create
Mm-hmm.
a better world for musicians. And I think that was another thing we had a lot of conviction around. We felt the space was too nascent to have to become default alive. Interesting idea, probably too late in the game.
Yeah, it's when I was just talking to somebody else about this, though, is you need to experiment at the beginning because you need to set precedents and create pathways and potential roadmaps for people in the future. It's just like the way building shit works. It's like first few
Totally.
times it doesn't work very well, and then oh, we know not to do that, or like
Totally.
that element of that worked really well. Let's lean into that and structure ourselves around that one piece.
And I think, yeah, I think the problem with music is that music and NFTs had a race. You had these people that were getting very large investments, like one of,
Right? Yeah.
and I think they've even scaled away from music. I don't even know if music's their core focus anymore.
I don't think it is. I think they do a little bit of everything last time I checked.
Yeah. And so I think what happened was everybody was trying to access capital and acquire as much content as possible. And I don't know, we saw this gray zone where I think everybody halted a little bit and it was like, oof, let's slow down real quick.
Yeah.
Does the market even want this? We talked with artists anywhere from very small to very big, and we had all range of things. People were like, fuck off. This sounds interesting. I could get a split
Hmm.
in 30 seconds from sale. That
Hmm.
sounds like a dream. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yeah, it felt, I guess, the way capitalism works. It's not surprising just to see a run on who can corner the market the fastest and use like very traditional routes of investment and of capital in order to get there quickly. It's interesting to juxtapose the what is Web3 and the elements of Web3, because of course you have blockchain technology, which has a lot of value and a lot of different use cases depending on through which lens you're looking at it. And then you also have the ethos that comes from it, which is in part kind of derived from what the blockchain enables, that being decentralization, like provenance, that as you're talking about, like you want artists and people to create things on your platform, but you're okay with the fact it doesn't have to stay on your platform, and like and that's healthy, that kind of open source ethos. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on those two things, because it feels like hard to also reconcile that when you have like traditional routes of capital that are ROI driven and depend on scale, coming in putting money into products that require slower growth and more patience and more intention, especially when you're introducing something like a digital wallet where you're talking to people with all different levels of education, don't really like, and consequently all these different levels of friction and all of the stigma that's in the space. Like you really have to let people catch up. Anyways, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that
Yeah.
disconnect.
Yeah. I think there's a lot there to unpack. There's definitely an issue with, how do I want to phrase this? I think there's an issue with people running into the space blindly
Mm,
on this false premise of almost like a get rich quick. And what that led to was a lot of people coming into the space without intention. And that was like in tandem to that was like one of the biggest worries with a lot of medium and large artists that we talked to was like, hey, I've worked decades to build my brand. I don't want to dilute it on this almost cash grabby thing, which is why we created another product, which was posters, which was effectively free NFTs before free NFTs were cool.
mm-hmm.
And that was a way to counter that, which was like, let's just get people into the space. And I think it's really challenging. I think it's also really up to platforms to set realistic expectations. And it's not a, let me create exit liquidity of my community. Hopefully, it's more of a, let's build a sustainable super community, if you will. And I think it's fascinating to see the financialization of Web3 is for all intents and purposes like the financialization of everything. And so
Yeah,
it's
kind of.
interesting to look at that through the lens of an artist who typically doesn't have a lot of money or it's struggling, or even larger artists. It's not all sunshine and roses. It's hard. You got to chase down. Maybe you didn't get paid this or that, or touring. Like it's not an easy journey by any means. So I think it's tough. And I think that this is where a lot of L2s or side chains come in. And we didn't
Mm-hmm.
really touch on this a lot, but I think that there's a lot of interesting use cases there where you can do things with more obfuscation that make it less about financialization and more about the rails of blockchain. And I think it's an easier sell for the fan side of things. On the artist side, like usually this equates to lower spend on NFTs or maybe potentially even more difficult processes. And I recognize that. But it also creates more sustainable groups, in my opinion. And like even at Mint Songs, like since we built on Polygon for one of our features, if you will, or one of our platforms, whatever you want to call it, we covered all the gas fees for everyone. So it was completely obfuscated where you didn't even have to, fans aren't even thinking about gas fees. Artists aren't even,
Right.
you could, on Mint Songs, you could sign up with an email, mint a song without having a wallet or any Matic, which is the underlying token for Polygon, in 30 seconds. And that low friction, I think, is really important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's been a lot of infrastructural development over the past year or so. I don't know. Time in crypto doesn't really operate the same
Yeah.
way as the
Yeah.
rest.
We're at a different dimension.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So yeah, I'm excited to see there's been a lot of attention given to what are the consumer applications that are now going to utilize this infrastructure, and now that it is, to your point, obfuscated a bit more, what does that mean. I know Seed Club, for instance, like they just launched like their most recent season is fully dedicated to consumer crypto applications. And it'll be interesting to see what the use case is. And I'm sure like a lot of people will see like things like L2s as the unlock to thinking about growth and thinking about scale in ways that can potentially rival the convenient Web2 products that we all know and love.
Yep. And I think like you're seeing these grow over time. I think a team that I've been consistently impressed with is 0x Splits. I think they found themselves accidentally in a niche of the music space as they quickly
Yeah,
realized, oh, splits make a ton of sense here.
yeah, so much sense.
And I think that they've done a lot to help drive the space forward. I think they have a lot of really interesting thoughts, and the way that they view software in the context of blockchain is really fascinating because
Mm,
it's very protocol first.
mm,
Let's create this permissionless thing that sits out and anybody can use it. And this is beneficial to virtually any party, anything
right.
that you want to split money with. And
Yeah,
it's completely permissionless.
yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Turns out there are a lot of things in life where you want to split money with with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Music being a great example. Should we get to a point where we can all agree on the metadata and all the rights holders and how that whole convoluted mess works? Speaking of products that are more universal and applicable to things outside of the music industry, you've now moved on to a Dune Analytics, and I'd just love to touch on that just a little bit if you could talk about your role there.
Yeah. I joined Dune. I think I was always, for any artist that ever talked to me, which I talked to hundreds, if not maybe even thousands, but I'm a very analytics driven person, or anybody that's really ever talked to me. And so I was always really fascinated with Dune. I had a lot of respect for Frederick and Matt's. They had an arduous journey that wasn't easy. And I think that a lot of the things that we were building at Mint Songs on the analytics side were Dune inspired, where it's like, hey, how can we create these graphs or give you these funnels or like these other things? And I was trying to be really intentional about where I ended up next. And I think it ended up like this convergence of all the things that I'm passionate about, or a lot of the things that I'm passionate about. Obviously, not all, but where
Mm,
it's blockchain, you have analytics. One of the teams that I'm managing, one of the engineering teams that I'm managing is AI focused. And so you have this fun with AI. And yeah, it was just like this really fascinating convergence of a lot of things. And it's been a lot of fun. I've only been here for a month. And so it's been a good time and so far.
good, good. I'm happy to hear that. Wish you only the best as you continue to go down that path, climb that dune.
Yes.
Couldn't help myself, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's funny too because some of the core infrastructure is hedged around Dune, like the movie.
Mm,
So you'll see this crossover, almost like a little. It's almost like a joke of the sci-fi interaction,
yeah,
and
cool.
so I
I
love it.
appreciate that. And finally, because I mentioned this at the beginning, I said I'd come back to it, and it fits in terms of talking about things you're passionate about and dunes being a natural of the natural world. I just want to circle back to your love of nature as a paradigm of life and just explore that a little bit more. Leave tech behind and the screens behind for a second and just talk a little bit about how nature forms your paradigm of life.
To maybe draw a broader picture. After college, my partner Lily, she biked across the U.S., sleeping in parks and all sorts of stuff. At that same time, I was living in a Sprinter van, traveling around the US, fly fishing and taking photos. And so I was spending a
Cool.
lot of time in nature, out on the water. And after a couple of months, we had connected, and I don't know how deep I should take the story, but
As deep
like
as you want.
me and Lily had dated before. We separated in college. We'd known each other since we were in like fourth grade or third grade. And then that came, we were coming to the end of these very outdoorsy points in our life. And so we decided, well, let's do some more. And we lived out of a rooftop tent on our Jeep for 3 months, just living in forests. And I think a lot of the crossover in nature just there's just so many crossovers. Like the way that you have to find your resources. And for us, that was even like finding places to sleep. We didn't sleep in hotels, we slept in the forest. And so
Mm.
being able to chart your own journey, being able to find your own resources, it's not just crossover into light or into tech, but it's like really a lot of crossover into life. And
Mm.
I think that helped shape us as we dove into our careers, where sometimes it's not the easiest road. Sometimes you take a wrong turn. Sometimes you go down the wrong trail. Sometimes you learn the hard way. For me, that was mountain biking and going off of a jump that was way too high for my experience level, and getting a concussion and bruised ribs and stitches on my face.
Damn, sorry.
You learn, yeah, it's all good. I gave up downhill mountain biking after that for what it's worth. I
That
only do
makes
cross
sense.
country now.
Fair.
I think there's so many parallels, and I think that's why it's a lot of very successful people in life spend a lot of time outdoors. Or this is my perception. I could be totally off, but this is something I've noticed, and I think that there's a reason to it, and I think it's because of a lot of these just like crossovers.
Totally. I think I love that metaphor, or all of the metaphors that you were drawing there. And yeah, I guess the perception of seeing successful people who spend a lot of time in nature makes sense. Like it requires, like, in order to success can mean a lot of different things, but in order to I guess elevate in whatever success means for you and in your industry, you have to think like abstractly, you have to think expansively, you have to let your mind open. And in my experience, there's no better place to do that than wandering around away from stimulus and just connected in nature. Like, being by yourself in nature is actually like one of the most connective experiences that you can have.
And yeah, there's just, we could spend an hour talking about just
Totally.
learnings from there, like
Yeah.
inherent worth of things in nature. Wood and the concept of a city is virtually worthless outside of furniture, but when you're in nature, all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's one of the most expensive things that you would want.
Yeah.
Growth and balance and harmony, resilience, sustainability. There's just so many learnings throughout diversity and collaboration, like how these things all
Mm.
interact together. Yeah. Yeah, we could spend a whole hour talking through a lot of these.
Yeah. We could turn this into a nature podcast. But yeah, arguably, there's also been no more important time to reconnect with nature as well. Because also, when you're in nature, which still feels kind of strange to me, it feels like we should always be in nature, like we're of the natural world or in the natural world. But I guess we technically are, regardless of where we are. Like being in the woods, being on a lake, et cetera. It also, or being exposed to the diversity, like to the biodiversity and like the immensely complex but like perfectly balanced ecosystems that surround us. It like creates a sense of awe, and I think also a sense of empathy that is really important to cultivate, especially like in a climate crisis that isn't going to go away unless we stop fucking around.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like the other, I don't know, like one of the, there weren't a lot of good things that came out of COVID. One of the good things that came out of COVID in the US was there was like a strong drive to go into nature because it was one of the places
Mm.
that had no restrictions, for better or
Mm-hmm.
worse. I think that paired with a lot of me and Lily's favorite spots are like, how do we get as far away from the world as we can in a time frame? And you wouldn't have service or like, you just, it's very intimate because there's nothing to do but your thoughts, talk, and act. Like, I think that's like a really introspective time. And
Yeah.
I've really like, I say all this, but in fairness, I haven't done it enough since I moved back to Virginia. And like, I'm regretting not having spent as much time in nature as I probably should be.
I feel that. Feel the same way. Let's use this as mutual inspiration and mutual accountability to make sure that we both spend more time in nature over the coming months.
I love that. Yes. I'm very on board.
Cool. All right, let's do it. And that feels like a good place to leave things, I think. Go outside.
Yeah.
uh,
Touch
and
grass.
touch grass, indeed. I just have one more question for you that I ask everybody at the end of these. You are going to a desert island and you get to bring 3 records with you. What are they?
Oof. Oof. Oof.
Sorry.
Oh, man. This is a really great question. It's not technically, I don't know. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Maybe this isn't a record, but Mac Miller's Tiny Desk set. I say that because I was just listening to that earlier, and it's a very, for me, even it's almost emotional because it's very intimate. I grew up listening to Mac a lot, and his story is a sad ending, for those that don't know. I think, oh man, it's a really good question. I think I would have to have some Kid Cudi in there. I spent a lot of time with Kid Cudi growing up, and I think if you're talking about time alone and you need a good album, probably Man on the Moon, maybe Man on the Moon 2. One of those two. And then I would need, so one of those is like very chill. One of those is very like be in your thoughts. So I need something that would like get the job done, like something to go out and forage. And for that, oh man, who would I pick for that? I'd probably want something like classical, something maybe potentially even, I don't know if this would be like too stereotypical, like Back in Black, AC/DC. Or
doesn't that album open with Hell's Bells? I think it does, right?
Yes, yeah, yep.
Yeah, that'll get you going.
Yeah, like I feel like that'd be like a good, let's charge.
Cool. Good trio. I love that.
Yeah, very all over the place. But
yeah, but as it should be, you're going to want some diverse sounds while you're on an island. At least to be in nature.
Yes. Maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah, we should all be on an island for a little while.
Yeah.
Anyhow, cool, Garrett. This has been really awesome. For those who are listening who want to follow along or get involved with any of the stuff that you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
Probably my Twitter. It is _Garrett Hughes, which is, I know, not a great name, but
it's clear.
Or alternatively, yeah, it is clear. Alternatively, go check out Dune.com, doing a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of interesting features for even, ironically, even music artists or people that don't have SQL skills that are trying to get data around things. We're spending a lot of time thinking about that on our LLM/AI team.
Cool. Awesome. Cool, man. Thank you again, so much for your time and energy and thoughts. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decential Media, and you can visit us at Decential.io, and remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.